My name is Grossman. I am a marketing advisor. In the last year, I've been working with companies to really help them put together their marketing team, sorry, their marketing strategy so that they can grow and scale. And I've been doing marketing for more than 15 years. I was a marketing executive, worked for companies like Microsoft and Google. I want to talk to you today about my experience working for an early stage startup called Kolu. And Kolu was a digital wallet app. And what that means is that we were working with SMBs to allow them to accept mobile payments without having to buy expensive hardware and kind of changing their point of sale. And on the other hand, we were also responsible for recruiting the end consumers who were using the app because we were building this marketplace and we wanted to make sure that our SMBs had customers who were willing to pay using their phone. And this was a really interesting experience. I joined as the first marketing hire and I had to build marketing from the ground up. And one of the first lessons that I learned is that you can't assume anything. You really have to validate. You can't rely on your gut feeling or something that you learned during your previous job. You really have to validate, to get data, to get information to make sure that your assumptions are correct. Otherwise, you're basically driving with your eyes closed. So every time I join a new company, I start by performing an audit, kind of going back, seeing all the data, all the information that we have to make sure that it's not just based on ideas and assumptions, but rather on actual information. And when I joined Kolu early on, we didn't really have that data. We weren't collecting enough data about our customers, so it was pretty challenging to know who our customers were. And there were all these assumptions, so I remember early on talking to the founding team, interviewing the product team, the sales team, even some of the engineers. And there were a lot of assumptions and ideas, but no one really had data. So we thought our customers were predominantly male. We thought they were probably younger in age and potentially tech savvy. But I didn't have that information, so I wanted to validate it. And all I did is I put together a survey, super simple, Google Forms, and sent it out to our entire database. At the time, that was about 5,000 people. And within a week, I had about 100 submissions. And surprise, surprise, we were talking to a completely different audience. Our audience was actually split evenly between men and women. And our biggest age bracket was actually 30 and above, which was completely the opposite of what we imagined. And understanding that we have a very different audience than what we assumed was groundbreaking, because now we could tell a different story. We can change our means of communications. We can think about other channels, and we're going to be able to deliver a different type of value because those customers wanted something else out of our application. So it was super important that we understood who they were. But demographics are not enough. You also want some qualitative information. You want to be able to talk to customers and really get their point of view. There's something so unique that happens when you let customers speak their mind. The second lesson I wanted to talk to you about today has to do with knowing your market. And I know it sounds so obvious, but you will not believe how many people actually skip this step because they kind of know it, they've been in the industry, they know what's happening, but they don't really take the time to reevaluate what's happening right now. And it's not just about knowing who your competitors are, and believe me, that's really important, but you also want to understand what are your customers' alternatives. So if they're not using you, do they have, better or easier or simpler ways to kind of do what it is that you're trying to help them do? And the third thing I try to look at when I evaluate a market, I try to think about trends. And it's not always just about trends that happen within your own market. For us, for example, there weren't a lot of changes in the fintech industry that were relevant to us, but because we were working very locally, so we were going city by city to recruit businesses and customers, anything that had to do with local economies was really important to us. And we actually relied on some of these trends to build our story and to differentiate in the market. And this is actually our next lesson, which is all about how you can position yourself out of the competition. And you probably heard it before, different is better than better. And I always thought it's just a cliche, but I actually ended up using it and it was very successful. So now I'm a little bit more open to it. The fourth lesson I wanted to share with you is about understanding how to focus on your best customers. And as an early stage startup, early on, yeah, you want to work with anyone who's willing to talk to you. We basically sprayed and prayed. But after a while, when you start working with customers, when you have a nice database, a pool of customers, you really need to try and understand who are your best customers, who are your kind of money makers, the ones that actually drive revenue, because not all businesses are created the same. Yet we still spend the same amount of time and money on acquiring them. And from a business perspective, that's just bad ROI. So we had to figure out who are our best customers. And to do that, you have to start with an hypothesis. You have to figure out for your own company and your own product, what are the criteria that are going to make a good customer. And for us, we actually had two. So the first and foremost was about revenue generation. And obviously you want the customers who bring in, the biggest revenue. But for us, we also had a second criteria that was really important. And that was around acquiring and retaining end consumers. Because you see, business owners, every time that someone would walk into their store, they would actually convince them to download the app and become a customer. So they were driving a big portion of our marketplace. So when we looked at best customers, it wasn't just about revenue, but it was also about how much they were helping us increase our overall community. And once we had those two criteria, we had to go back to our database and actually rank our customers. We looked at customers who downloaded the app and made a purchase within a 10-minute time frame. And every time we could do that, we attributed that customer to the store where the purchase was made. It's not, accurate, but it was close enough that we couldn't get that information without starting to track it from scratch. So once we had that information, we ranked our entire customer database and we started focusing on the top 30%. And because we didn't really have any fancy tools, it was basically about looking at the data and trying to figure out what do those companies have in common. And it wasn't size. Some of them were bigger, some of them were smaller. It wasn't employee count. It wasn't their location. Some of them were, in the center of the city. Some of them were in the suburbs. So we kind of wrecked our heads with it for a while. And what we ended up with, we realized that the businesses who were driving the most value to us, they had some component of habit to them. So whether it's buying your coffee every morning or having lunch every day, or even buying food for your pets, something that happens at least once a week, it has some repetitive element, those businesses were the biggest revenue drivers. And once we realized that, the sales team started focusing only on those types of businesses. But we didn't really want to disregard everyone else. So we created a self-service option on our website. It was just, a landing page where businesses could apply to become our partners. They would fill in all their information, and they would have an onboarding conversation with one of our reps. But that was different than actually going through the entire sales process and the handing that the sales team was doing with our best customers. And early on, our numbers actually dropped. So we really had to be long-term greedy and make sure that we wait long enough to see the results. And the results at the end were very positive. We actually increased our revenue significantly by focusing on our best customers. So sometimes you just need a little bit of patience to make sure that, a strategic move is actually paying off. And last but not least, and this is probably the most important lesson that I'm going to talk to you about today. If you don't take anything else, just remember this: you have to talk to your customers. And I know it is so much easier to rely on emails or surveys than actually meeting people in person, but you're going to miss out on so much if you don't do this. And you don't have to wait until you have a specific feature or a product that you want to test. You should probably do it on an ongoing basis and create a process. And this is what we ended up doing at Kolu. We had this advisory board on the consumer side, and we were setting up interviews once every month on the business side. And we got a ton of people who wanted to participate. We put them in a Google group. And then every month when we wanted to have a session, we will just shoot out an email to everyone and tell them, this is the time and place, can you make it? And we would end up with like 10 or 15 people actually coming over and having a conversation with us. And throughout, the entire time that we did this, I'm sure we came across amazing insights. And it was also super helpful every time that we wanted to really shape a new product or a new feature. It was super helpful to get feedback from customers directly. So to be honest, this is probably the best growth hack that I know, just talking to your customers and, more importantly, listening to them and then taking action. Because if you don't actually do something with those insights, it doesn't really have impact on your company. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for spending time with me. I hope this was useful. I know a lot of those lessons are pretty basic, but sometimes you really have to make sure that you focus on what matters and validating your assumptions, understanding your market so you can position yourself better, and talking to customers. Those are probably the biggest lessons, and they apply to smaller startups as well as bigger companies. And sometimes you just have to remember that basic could be really important.